Hey, all, just a quick note before we get started. First of all, I don't have the studio back up yet, so it sounds like I'm talking to you through a Pringles can. Well, that's your headset dollars at work. Secondly, I also had quite a cold during this interview, so I apologize. I was suffering from a little post-conference sickness, so sorry about that. In any case, I hope that you enjoyed this talk. Okay, this week I get a chance to talk to somebody who I've actually been dying to talk to for a while. His name's Aaron Higgins, and he is the mastermind behind 1010 Music, which just kind of actually made a pretty big splash this last weekend at Synthbox with the release of their newest, pre-release of their newest product. Rather than talk about it much, I'm going to let Aaron talk about it himself. Hey, Aaron, how's it going?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me, Darwin.
Thanks a lot for taking the time to talk. I am really excited to be able to chat with you. We actually exchanged some email a while ago, and you were pretty busy at the time. I'm really glad that I have a chance to ping you right now because you just had a product like announcement / pre-release, right?
That's right. At Synthflex, we had the opportunity to show off a brand new project. It's a tabletop sampler groove box. And it takes a lot of the things we've learned from doing modules and software in the past and puts them into a single compact little unit about 5 inches by 5 inches by 1 inch that aspires to be a personalized sampler, something that can hook to a controller or could operate standalone.
Yeah, it's really cool. I'll tell you, I happen to be walking at Synthplex. I happen to be walking from one place to another, and all of a sudden, kind of like squirting out of a side door, was my friend Russell Brower, the great composer, like holding a black box and like giggling to himself. And he's like, "Darwin, look what I got!" He was so excited
He
because,
was really excited.
yeah. But I think it's interesting because I think you're one of the people that's really kind of at the heart of something that's going on, which is the resurgence of the sampler. I think it's really fantastic. I mean, with your first product, which was the Bitbox, it really kind of lit people up to the idea of having a kind of full-fledged sampler in a Eurorack module. But you've kind of been at the heart of this, and I think that with the black box, you've kind of hit on something, which is also this idea of standalone hardware, and really kind of caught people's attention.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, we always aspire to sort of break some of the rules, but not all of them. In the case of the Bitbox, it seemed like a timely thing that hadn't really been fully exploited, taking touchscreen to modular. It obviously comes from a long lineage of other products like the MPC and Ableton and whatnot. And it just seemed like an opportunity that few had exploited, just being unabashedly digital in the Eurorack space. And of course, some people like it, some people think it's ridiculous, but that's what's great about Eurorack is that kind of anything goes. And these sort of funky colors, or it's not possible to be too outrageous. So that was where we started. And then taking that a step further, yes, there's certainly a trend towards standalone to try and do things outside of the box. Although phones and iPads and stuff have been doing that for quite some time. What's different now is that it's practical to build a custom piece that has lots of I/O. Admittedly, isn't as advanced as a phone's touchscreen. I mean, some of the screens are just gorgeous and
Right.
hard for a small vendor for like us to acquire. But you can build a really compelling hybrid out of, lots of MIDI and audio and various things that make for a small tabletop unit.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I also think that the one thing that something like the black box does that a phone will never be able to aspire to is actually hit the point of becoming an instrument. In addition to black box, there are obviously the things that Electron does that are kind of, some of them are in the sample world, some in the synth world. I think of like the mono Norns as another example. There are a number of these small digitally focused boxes that really strive to be instruments. And I think that, just having a slight play, and certainly looking at the delight of the people that got your pre-release boxes, I think that you've kind of hit that as well. I'm curious to know what it is. What is it that you learned maybe from the Bitbox that actually made you comfortable to think of making a full-on instrument?
We learned several different things. I guess first, you need buttons to augment a touchscreen. There's certain things like the transports; those just don't belong on a touchscreen. It's great to have dedicated buttons in the lower right. That was one thing I'd missed for a long time. Also, having better nav, kind of that pop, the what's on the back box is sort of the row of white buttons, which essentially get you around the application. That stuff's really essential because otherwise you're constantly like popping out like on your phone with the home button or same with the Bitbox that it's too cumbersome to work with and it's much easier to have that direct access. I guess also that some of the stuff that we make in the Euro rack space, Bitbox and Synthbox, they kind of belong more on the tabletop, that they're more fully functioning units that if anything, people often prefer something a little more focused in Eurorack, and whereas on tabletop, kind of it's a strength to have more things integrated and to be like the drummer or the bass player or the keyboard player in a single box as opposed to the keyboardist's left finger.
Right, right. That's actually a great point. And I did notice actually, it's funny because on your website you kind of have the black box and the Bitbox sitting next to each other. And while on one hand you can kind of really see how they're comparable things, you also get a real sense of the difference between the Eurorack mentality and the standalone mentality, in that the Eurorack has like no buttons and tons of jacks, and the black box has no jacks on the front panel and a lot of buttons. So it really points to a very different way of interacting with the tool.
Right. And I've spoken with plenty of product designers and product types that, and I agree. Look at something like the Bitbox and see a screen and the jacks on the same face and think that's asinine. And to a certain extent, it is. But that's
Now
that's what the format requires.
I never said asinine. I just
No,
said crazy.
you didn't. I'll say it.
Oh,
I'll
okay.
admit it. Whereas, when you get into a tabletop world, like, of course, it makes more sense to stick stuff. Well, you have more than one surface to work with in the first
Right,
place.
that's true.
So you can do such things. But yeah, even with the Bitbox, we didn't anticipate that people wanted the screen on the bottom. So we've offered a flipped mode, and that was, another thing that came up along the way. Something else we learned along the way is that people like to connect a sampler to CV. I mean, using DC coupled inputs and outputs is a feature I had overlooked at first, that people want to be able to grab an LFO or whatever and play it out as samplers, outputs.
Right, right. I want to dive into the different developments that you've created, because you've done frankly, some loony stuff. But
Sure.
All of these boxes really point to something that is very telling, which is you as a hardware/software designer have got some chops. Can you tell me a little bit about what is your background and what is the part of the 1010 series here that you really consider the thing that is your specialty?
Gosh, I guess I should first point out that I have worked a lot with a lot of very talented people. In particular, the industrial designer we work with is fantastic. We did some of the first rounds of hardware were done with an outside consultant. Some of the layout is done that way. Of course, the manufacturing and sort of the making it look great and making it fit together, that's all other people. I guess the one thing I can take some credit for is the software. That's my background. And maybe just the willingness to do something crazy and see what happens. That's, being a small business owner that lets you do that kind of stuff. Whereas bigger companies are going to be more likely to sit back and think about it and don't want to interfere with the brand and don't want to take too big of a risk. Where,
Right.
Yes, you can roll the dice and do something nuts. And if it's too nuts, just, shut down the place and go do something else.
Mm-hmm. So in terms then of your background, what kind of software background put you in a position to feel comfortable diving into something like this?
I've been doing this for quite a while now. I guess my first venture into full-time software is I started a company called Mixmeister in 2000, which was trying to take advantage of using MP3s on computers. And I built something akin to a DJ sequencer, something that would let you build a timeline-based thing, perfect for building a mixtape, where it always seemed crazy to me that if you're going to make an hour-long DJ mixtape, that you would sit in front of the computer and perform the thing perfectly right for 1 hour. That seemed like the perfect thing to automate. I was inspired by Acid, the Sonic Foundry product, and what that could do for DJing. So that was kind of my first take. I mean, I was so inexperienced at that point. I mean, it's a constant, learning process. But that was my first effort. It was a Windows piece of software. Did that for a few years. Later in my career, I started a company doing iOS software, and then the touchscreen. Of course, starting with a small iPhone touchscreen is not too far apart from what we're doing right now on the modular hardware. That gave me an opportunity to learn about the ARM processor and taking full advantage of the available resources, and just also focusing on building something that's fun, because iOS apps are so inexpensive and come and go. And if
Right.
you don't have something that's immediately apparent based on how it looks, people will discard it and move on to the next.
That is one big difference between an iOS app and something like your modules, which is, if you're dropping 600 bills on a module, it's not something that you're going to try for 10 minutes and walk away. So it seems like your responsibility then is to build something that's kind of a jaw dropper, just to make it so it seems like it has that kind of value proposition, right?
It's true. And also in the modern day with YouTube, you can show a lot of these things. You don't
Good
have to
point.
be
Yeah.
as self-apparent as it used to be. It used to be all about the screenshots.
So the Mixmeister, is that the Mixmeister that's still available?
Yes, it is.
Because when you said that, I was like, I remember this. And I jumped over to Mixmeister, which on the website, it actually looks like, at first I thought, is this the right? Because it looks like it's a yoga studio or
Right.
something. And then I
No, that
realized, oh, it's for making mixtape-like things. It's actually really pretty savvy, but I wouldn't have known it was even a music software at first look.
that was something that really surprised us. A talented business development person I was working with at the time sort of tapped into the fitness market, and the top instructors want to build their own custom mix, and they really need to worry
Right.
about 32 counts and things like that. And
Oh, sure.
we got in touch with some partners, and there's now people who build tutorials around it. And yeah, totally didn't see that coming, but I can see how it's a mainstream use.
That's incredible. That's wild. When is it that you decided to kick off Tintin Music, and how long did it take to get that first Bitbox built out?
Let's see. So in 2015, I started mid 2015. I started a new company. Had the desire to go off and again try something brand new and ridiculous. The first thing I did was build a synthesizer in Minecraft, which is a whole other story. Um, which I realized is cool, but nobody wants that. Then it sort of quickly parlayed into where else could we use what's hot, where else could we use this kind of software, and modular synthesis came up. That there were still lots of opportunities. There remain lots of opportunities to do digital and modular synthesis. So that seemed like the next obvious step. Let's see. I ran some demo boards, tried some crazy experiments. The Teensy was a great first step into learning how to program for hardware, but it quickly bottomed out in terms of it's only a 16-bit audio path, and you can see
Right.
how you're going to need to, in order to make it take it to the next level, it was going to be a new audio library, and
Yeah,
it
it was
wasn't
going to be
quite fast
hamstrung.
enough. And
Yeah.
so that's when somebody introduced me to the STM32F7, which is a popular processor. I'm sure at least some of your guests have talked about, and it's just the fact that it's so integrated. It can do a touchscreen. It can do a small LCD screen. It can also do the audio processing and talk to audio codecs, and also scan some buttons and a bunch of CV jacks. So it's quite versatile, and makes something like that possible. From there, I got hooked up with the hardware designer. It took us roughly a year, but that very first version that we put out was sad by today's standards. But it's fantastic with the software mods. We'll be able to add. It's a blessing and a curse, honestly, to have software that you can upgrade after the fact, because then it's never done, and people
Right.
expect a ongoing evolution of the software, which is ultimately a good thing. But yeah, it becomes a snowball going downhill.
Sure. Now, working with the F7, you're able to work pretty much at the bare iron level. You don't have to deal with an operating system, right?
Right. I mean, the choice we made was to not use an operating system. There are some open source tools for just a real-time operating system and for the file system, but other than that, it's a bare metal type thing, which I would honestly say is partially crazy. I mean, at least it lets us get into the smaller processors, but it's more work than I thought.
Okay, well, so see, I was going to say my next question was going to be, are you crazy?
Yes,
But now you
the answer
answered
is
that
yes.
question for me already. Um, that seems outrageous given that if we just talk about, let's just talk about the Bitbox. If we just talk about the Bitbox, the number of like operating system level things you have to deal with, whether it's memory management or file loading and saving, or this, threading for display management, priority handling, and all that stuff. It seems to me like you have bitten off an enormous chunk.
That's true. I guess at least I had a running start and built audio engines previously and had some idea of what to do and what to put where.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was a pretty big task, and I failed to consider just how difficult it would be to bring up the file system, and that I would essentially need to write an audio driver and a display driver and on and on and on and on.
Hmm.
The good news is now that we've got that stuff in place, it gives us a running start, and something like Blackbox becomes much easier.
The neat thing is that you've actually parlayed all of those developments into a core system that has generated a number of devices. I mean, some of them pretty broad-based tools like the Fxbox effects module or the Toolbox sequencer system, or even sort of like the remarkably ridiculous thing like the laser box, which is a pattern generator for lasers. I mean, all of these are built off of, in essence, the same hardware platform, right?
That's right.
But I'm surprised that relatively few people did it. Audio Damage, when they were operating, they kind of built off of a singular platform with different implementations. But otherwise, I haven't seen a lot of that. And I think it's pretty smart, especially when you have to go through the effort you do in order to get something with a full display and all this stuff operational. Is there any hardware differences between them?
There's two lines in our module product line. There's Series 1 and Series 2. They both use the same STM32F7. They have
Hmm.
a different set of I/O. The Toolbox and the Laserbox have a series of outputs, whereas the Bitbox has a series of inputs. So it's really just
Okay,
all about the I/O. And
got
then
it.
the Blackbox is using a newer processor, which again was a crazy exercise in trying to bring up hardware that's not entirely ready for prime time. But it's good to have it behind me.
Right, I guess. Now, you actually were selling a few units at Synthplex. Did you just happen to have a bunch of parts laying around your garage, or was that specifically for developers? What was up with that?
We did a pre-production run, and that enabled us to have stuff that's production worthy, missing, a couple of, tiny little things at the very last minute. But we just want to do a test run that turned out right. I mean, we've done several prototypes on this one. So it's essentially, we took a small risk, built a few units, and wanted to get some feedback and get it in people's hands and start things rolling before we do a full production run, which is also in progress and is going to happen in early May.
Sure. So, what has been the feedback that you've been getting about the products as a whole? I mean, one of the nice things is YouTube kind of gives us a sense of how people buy into stuff. And I actually really enjoy some of the videos about particularly, I've been fascinated by the Bitbox since it came out. Watching some of the use of it, I was actually really pleased to see there were a lot of people that were taking advantage of the CD control of the thing and stuff like that to generate some not MPC like behavior, which was really great to see. What have you seen in terms of the uptake of how people use it, as well as what surprised you the most?
Specifically on the black box, I've been pleasantly surprised that people like the small form factor. Granted, it's not for everyone. Someone complained it was for ants, but then this is not for you. That's fine. I can live with that. People seem to embrace that it like doesn't have controls built in that you can plug things in. I mean, I guess it's like the bet has so far paid off that a smaller dependent device is kind of the way to go. People are generally happy with the level of integration that we did. That combining a sequencer with a sampler and some effects seems to make sense. I mean, granted, we're following suit from a lot of other capable companies like Korg and Electron and so forth. I guess I'm pleasantly surprised that it's breaking some of the rules, but not all of them. That seems like we've made some reasonable choices, but it's still brand new, and we shall see.
Now, when you say breaking some of the rules, what in particular do you feel like you went and where do you think you crossed the line?
Let's see. I mean, some people asked us up front, like, "Come on, you can't have mini stereo jacks. Like that's just lame." I mean, they weren't quite so strong, but they've strongly advocated the big phono jacks. And what persuaded me is that there's enough pro level cables out there that do the 3.5 millimeter jack that it's all about the cable.
Hmm.
And it's also quite apparent when you see it that it would be a bigger unit if you had that. Where else did we cross the line? Making it too small, perhaps. But I
Mm.
guess compact is valued in some circles. It makes it a little bit more portable. I'm trying to think of what else.
Well, one of the things, do you ever worry that people too easily take a look at it, dismiss it as like, oh, well, this is just like someone else trying to make Ableton in a box or something? Does that worry you at all?
Sure. I mean, it's easy. We're just getting started. We're not
It's
that
an easy
established. It's
swing,
easy.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's an easy swing. We also made some choices with our UI that it's kind of boxy and Minecraft-esque, and that's not for everyone. But we're not going to please everyone with aesthetic choices. Do I worry that people are going to dismiss it? I mean, sure. I'd much rather worry about like building something that enough people love than worrying about the haters.
Right. Okay, so now you have mentioned it twice. I can't ignore it anymore. Fascination with Minecraft. Sounds like
Yes.
sounds like you're into Minecraft. What's up with
Yeah. So
that?
So my kids got me into it several years ago, and it's a great thing for parents and kids. Are you familiar with it?
Oh, I am. I will tell you that my experience with Minecraft, first of all, is that I was overjoyed watching my children get into Minecraft because one of the problems I always had with 3D world environments is that the slightest thing that was off kilter would like throw me out of the screen and make me feel like I wasn't, immersed in things, right? And I saw them working with Minecraft, even though there was things that were kind of crude, they were able to learn to suspend those kind of problems and could kind of dive in and stay immersed in it. I thought, well, hey, there's a good training ground for the future, right?
Right. I mean, what appealed to me, like most people, is that it's by nature of having the 1 meter cubed boxes, it's simple yet deep enough that it can, appeal on many levels.
Right.
I was first intrigued by it as just it's a cool way to put things together. I mean, I've now done a couple of projects on it. The most interesting one is the synthesizer, where I thought, mistakenly that it would be incredibly cool to have blocks that were like modular synthesis pieces, like an oscillator or a filter or a step sequencer or that kind of thing. And you would
Right.
use Redstone to connect them together.
Sure.
It turned out to be a lot of fun and ultimately turned out to produce blocks that were useful later in our product line. But it's also just hilarious to have a synthesizer where there's a sheep walking through the middle of it. And
Did you pass those around in some way?
oh, there's a beta version posted on the internet, so you can see videos and download it if you're really, really so inclined.
Oh, I
The
had
one
no
thing I will
idea.
warn you is that it's painful to install. Very specific build in Minecraft and a very
Mm.
specific add-in. There's a specific third-party tool that you need to install, and that's one of the things that turned me off from taking this and making it a commercial product, is it was just too painful to get on somebody's box. But
Right,
more
sure.
interestingly, there's videos you can look at if you're wanting to know more.
Yeah, I have to say that there were a couple of Saturday mornings that were blown by some of these third-party install processes. It kind of points, though, to something that is sort of indicative of what happens when you look at the user interfaces of a lot of your work, which is that you do kind of like these construction block sort of interfaces, right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Minecraft is particularly boxy. It's particularly, old school. I mean, it's really opened my eyes to, you can do something that's really pixelated and like nasty and stuff that people would turn people off, but instead it's the opposite. It's,
Hmm.
it's charming and simplistic and, appeals on a different level. I mean, some of my kids play video games that are, 8-bit ports and stuff that looks, from the 80s, and yet it's still modern and interesting. So that's part of the aesthetic we tried to capture for a few different reasons. One, it's kind of in vogue, and two, it's sort of easier to pull off.
Certainly. Well, although I also think that it does make it so that it jumps off the screen a little bit because in the world of, especially with some background in iOS apps, I mean, you were probably pummeled by the idea of everything having to be ultra realistic and super slick in order to be even considered. And
Right.
as a result, having something that's a little bit crude, but also harkens back to old Nintendo style or old Commodore style graphics, really can make something jump off the screen.
Right. And further, I previously worked at Native Instruments and I got to have a sense of like that stuff looks incredible. And there's a whole team of people that make it that way. And it's, you need to like
Right.
double your engineering team to pull that stuff off. And that was just
Yeah,
impractical for a
sure.
company our size. So it was a conscious effort to, look crazy and ghetto as opposed to super slick.
Nice, nice. With your stuff, how much do you get involved in like the voice this so each of your different things has sort of like a different kind of concept of how you get started, right? So like with the effects box, you're going to have a bunch of pre-designed effects. Synthbox, you're going to have some pre-designed synthesis stuff. And even I guess I haven't interacted with the laser box at all, but I am assuming you're going to have some sort of like built-in generators for this. How much do you get involved in that process, and how much do you sort of like work with the community to help develop that stuff?
Yeah, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a number of different parties like Soundtrack Loops and Loop Masters and people who've supplied content for Blackbox and elsewhere that like that stuff in particular, samples, presets. I mean, that's not my expertise and outside parties do such a tremendous job of that. So they deserve a lot of credit. They deserve for the sound sets themselves all the credit. So I like to check it out when it's done. The presets, we had another talented preset designer do the stuff for Synthbox, including the wavetables and the presets.
Mm-hmm.
I guess on the effects side, I can take some credit for doing the actual algorithms, but there's some stuff that's off the shelf. And it's a combination. I mean, it's like kind of knowing where you can tap into expertise and what you might be able to pull off yourself. I mean, the internet is great nowadays with being able to see the Totoro reverb and block diagram on
Right,
Wikipedia, and that kind of
right.
stuff. That's used to be a trade secret is now freely available.
Yeah, that's actually it's funny you say that because I've just been involved in doing some hacking to implement that in another little code pile. And you're right. It used to be that even the simplest of algorithms were like well cloaked, right? And now there's such a plethora of stuff that you can use at least as starting points,
Right. I mean, it's not always source code that you can drop in, but at least if it
right?
gives you the key pieces like how to make a reverb, that's 80-90% of the work.
Hmm. So since I've mentioned it a couple of times, I'm going to peg myself on this, which is I remain fascinated by the fact that you put the effort in doing the laser box. What was the impetus behind that? I mean, do you have a particular love of lasers, or did you have like an artist draw to do that, or was there a business draw to get involved?
This certainly was not a business draw. He, one of our customers was using Bitbox for playing back laser automations. And when he first approached me with it, I just, like, how is that possible? How does that work? And he walked me through how laser signals are usually, they're trying to do like 30,000 points a second, which is
Right.
not too far away from 48 kilohertz
Audio rate,
waveform,
right? Yeah.
audio rates. They don't even need 24-bit. The one key thing they do need 5-channel access, which is an X, a Y, an R, G, and B,
Hmm.
which did take some doing. But he pointed out to me that you can generate some really cool shows on a computer. This artist in particular, Zach Forrest, does some really cool work with laser manipulations using an analog synthesizer. So he'll take a computer to generate patterns, run it through an analog synth, sort of make it come alive, make like a static text pattern come alive with all the typical analog modulations that we use for sound, and then record that onto a wave file. Then you need something capable of playing a 5-channel wave file, which is what really inspired the Laserbox. Was if you can just build a 5-channel wave file player and something that's embedded, something you just turn on, it's great for a museum piece or something where you just want the same thing to happen, but it's sort of pre-recorded but constantly running. So that led to an exploration of lasers, which I would encourage you to check some of that stuff out because there's a very interesting parallel between analog laser synthesis and audio synthesis. Modulations and oscillators beating against one another, and
Hmm.
just using stuff from the 80s that we were using to produce sound could produce laser shows, and that's now kind of transformed into digital, and you can sample it and use a computer to generate all kinds of crazy patterns. But it was just fun to play around with. I got hooked up with some people who make lasers, and it was a great diversion. But yeah, ultimately, it's not a huge commercial success, but certainly fun to play around with.
Well, I just think it's amazing that laser shows are coming back. I know when Robert Henke was like first playing around with it, I was like, "You got to be kidding me," because I remember a time I used to do a lot of performing in planetariums, right? And there was a time when planetariums all had like laser shows as part of their like, I think it was part of how they stayed open, which was like, let's play Pink Floyd, shoot lasers. That
Right.
was like the planetarium business model. It was, I remember at the time I'd be playing in, all of these planetariums were going through like refurbishments where they were taking out their old optical systems and taking out the old laser systems and replacing everything with digital, right? I remember thinking that was kind of a shame because there was something that was so quaint and cool about those laser graphics. And it's really interesting now for me to see those coming back in kind of a big way.
Right. And certainly the costs have come way down, and it's
Right.
possible to get a $1,000 laser that's what you saw in the planetarium 20 years ago. And
Right. It probably
that,
cost 20 grand at that time.
right. And to use just a basic computer program to run the thing, including beat syncing and all kinds of fun stuff. I mean, it just appealed to my, you know, sense of putting on lighting shows and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So, you hint at having kind of a an artistic practice. Are you a practicing playing musician, or are you a hobbyist, or what's your musical background?
Let's see. So my musical background starts in fourth grade when I got French horn lessons. That's probably the instrument I studied the most seriously. It's great to have the ability to read music and know what a key is, and
Hmm.
have trained tracking pitch. Since then, it's just been fun to play a lot of different things. I would say I play the computer. I play a little bit of bass, and it's hard in this sense not to have like some keyboard skills, but I certainly wouldn't call myself skilled. I just love playing around with this stuff. Although more than often, I fall into the trap of many of our customers, which is I spend more time trying to figure out like how to build the perfect instrument and how to integrate things in the most effective way, and less time actually creating the music. I find it's most fun to create music when you're with other people, because at least then there's kind of a shared experience and a back and forth, and the pressure to do something right away and not get distracted with, oh, what else can I add to my rig?
That's actually a really great point. Working with other people kind of like tamps down the self-doubt problem. I think that because when you're working with someone else, you can hear what they were doing and be really into it. You're not just focused on like your own thing and like, is that good or is that crap? I can't even tell. You know.
Right. Yeah, it's nice to have a conversation with the music and not just be lost in terms of what to do next.
So your movement into modular, was that just simply because it looked like a place to bring your skills, or were you into modular before you started building them?
I would have to say it's more the former, that it seemed like an interesting next domain, that iOS was cool and had its day, but it seemed like the real action now in the past several years has been in modular.
Hmm. Interesting. So how did you get started in that then? I mean, because that's a pretty deep pool to just jump into.
I guess it was, a matter of having some free time, following the trends. I mean, it's certainly like most modular users, I had that big cliff edge where it's like, I don't know, like buying a rack is kind of expensive, and like you start with the power supply and you can't even make any sound. Then you got to buy all the modules. So I think that's one thing as an industry we're doing a pretty poor job on it, which is to help beginners kind of get into the sport, because it's just daunting.
Right.
But there's lots of stuff out there. Learning modular is a great resource, and just building a single analog voice. But it was fun to explore something new and different. But I quickly realized that, I think even Mo pointed out that like modular is like hot rodding, that people do spend a lot of time playing around with it and building the ultimate thing. And sound exploration is number one goal, but sort of number two goal is like build a cool spaceship. And sure, I enjoyed that just like everybody else.
Right. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting, though, is that because your modules are mostly built off the same platform, you actually allow people to, I guess, like take a Bitbox and turn it into a Toolbox or a FSbox if they choose to, right?
Almost correct.
Almost correct. Okay.
Almost. The Bitbox, Fxbox, and Synthbox are sister products that can switch back and forth. Toolbox is
Oh,
a separate,
oh,
because of the
okay.
I/O that we discussed.
Oh, right. Yeah, of
Therefore, it
course.
can't really go back and forth.
Sure,
But
sure.
Toolbox and Laserbox are sisters and can do that.
Interesting, interesting. Because the one thing I wonder about sometimes for modular builders, if they don't feel a little ill at ease, basically saying, kind of feeding a customer base that feels like in order to try something new, they have to make these huge investments. And as a result, it makes it difficult for anyone other than the most affluent to enjoy it.
Right. I mean, for me, it was. I also like about modular is that it's like it's a back to basics. I mean, the thing it's dedicated hardware. It's stuff that's going to still be useful in 10 or 20 years, whereas software is so much more ephemeral. I mean, iOS apps that I've worked on are now dead and won't run.
No
Um,
kidding.
but to actually have to like realize what a saw wave sounds like. I mean, that was kind of new for me. Yes, I'd used digital synths before, but it was like a truly down to the rudiments that you rarely have an opportunity to worry about. It's usually all taken care of for you.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. And actually, that's where, to me, sort of the things that you did to make the Synthbox, which is the synthesizer module. What you did there was actually really interesting because the way that you visualize stuff is something I haven't seen done as well in any other, at least in my experience, in any other Eurorack synthesis module. You really help people understand in a very visceral way what it is that they're building, and I think that really struck me as having had to be a fairly difficult design process.
It's first, thank you. I mean, it's next. It's there's all kinds of things going on with the design process of partially. Yes, we have the Minecraft aesthetic, but it's also important to put waveforms and it's important to have some bling. I mean, like the whole Keith Emerson computer monitor thing. I have seen people put our modules in their rig and use Laserbox just to have something going on. Um, but I would say it mostly stems from iOS experience. That stuff needs to be as apparent as possible. And also, a touchscreen can do some pretty amazing things. You can just change context. You can have different buttons and different settings, and it's far more. Uh, the medium allows you to make something more easy to use and sort of more apparent than using an LED that has 10 different colors or a
Mm,
shift button or various things that you know befuddle me.
sure. So now, how big is your team? Because you started this thing in 2015. When is it that the Bitbox first was released?
The Bitbox, if memory
It's in
serves, was late
17?
late 2016.
Oh, late 2016. Okay. So really, in the subsequent 2.5, 3 years, you have punched out now 6 primary products. Then you have a couple of things. You have a buffered malt, which I assume you did because you used the 3-pin MIDI system, right? That was for
It's
you,
just
right?
yeah, that was for me, and I
Okay.
think I'm the only one who bought one.
Oh, really? Oh, it seems
No,
like a
it's
smart
it's
idea,
been surprised.
actually.
Yeah, it's not as successful as I would have thought.
Ah, interesting. And then you have a shield for the teensy, which looks pretty fascinating and is interesting. But with these 6 primary products, I mean, what is the team? Is the team primarily you and then some consultants, or do you have other people working with you to get these out the door?
I would say it's a virtual team of approximately six. I mean, it's hard to count like manufacturing, but that's a huge resource.
Right,
Like
right.
tapped in the right people, and they're really doing things that exceed your expectations. So I'd start there. I'm certainly doing this full time. My wife, who's a former software professional, has been helping out for a long time, and just even taking care of everything else like program management,
Mm,
shipping and fulfillment.
right.
We've got a distributor in Germany who really helps out, and just trying to tap into as many of those resources as possible. We do have a tremendous industrial designer. We've also just partnered up with Media Overkill to do a module that's our first third party module. So that's an opportunity to get more software on the platform. Hardware and layout design, we outsource that work. Graphics design, web design, a lot of those things that can be done by trained professionals, or sound design. I mean, hopefully you get the impression here that's like there's just a
Yeah.
lot of hired guns that do tremendous work, like kind of as needed.
Yeah, that's actually pretty awesome. But you're saying really full time, it's you and with some help from your wife.
That's right.
Wow. That's pretty wild. It's pretty impressive. You have a third party module in the works. Tell me a little bit about what to look forward to other than the black box broadly shipping, which I think that's what everybody right now is going to be salivating over. But what other stuff do you have kind of playing in the works?
Sure. So the Media Overkill module is based on their plugin called Wave Razor, which is essentially wavetable synthesis meets slicing. So sort of like
Mm,
micro wavetables and
all
produce some
right.
really cool, unique sounds. That's now been demonstrated publicly a couple of times and is, a couple of months off. So that's coming soon. In terms of other things from us, we're happy to just have something brand new out the door. So there's not a lot of stuff yet in the works, but based on the uptake of Blackbox so far, you can expect to see more in that space. And people have really loved having different software that you can fly onto the module, and that seems like something we're going to continue, but just don't have any products yet to announce. Yeah, it's touchscreens are great. Touchscreens are flexible. The sort of open-ended nature is a wonderful and cursed thing sometimes, but software does a lot of cool stuff, and you can expect to see more there.
And you really see yourself staying in the game with these kind of software driven systems. That's what you feel like is your spot in the sun.
Yes, I would say that's working. I would say that's a somewhat unique take on it. Of course, it's not for everyone. Some people think touchscreens are, sad and whatever else. But yeah, that seems to be working for us, and we've got enough sort of support that plan to continue doing that.
Sure. Yeah, well, I guess if for people who think that touchscreens are the devil, well, no one told them they had to dance with the devil, right? So you can find something else to
That's
do.
right. There's lots of knobs out there for you.
There's lots of knobs for others, right? That's great. And I saw you out at Synthplex. How did that go for you out there?
Yes, that was a first time show.
Mm-hmm.
I was quite pleased. They pulled in a lot of great people. I mean, being in LA, it's not so hard
Right,
to pull like lots of industry folks and
right.
celebrities and whatnot. It was nice to have something new and unique to show off. So that certainly helped bring people to the booth. Yeah, it was nice to have something close to home. That's one of the first shows I've been to in many months that I could stay at home and just go back
Right.
and forth.
Sure.
All told, it was a great first showing for Synthplex.
Yeah, well, I thought it was interesting because you were, in fact, kind of the buzz of the show too. By I don't know if you had talked to anyone about the black box before you went there, but that one kind of was like everybody was like, "Oh, dude, did you see?" That kind of helped you out a lot to kind of be in that position.
Well, yeah, we're very fortunate and planned the timing. We've sat NAM out so that we can go to this show and make a
Uh,
splash.
yeah, yeah. There you go.
And I'm hopeful that this show, like Super Booth, will be this sort of offshoot that is something that we don't have to deal with guitar players. It's all synthesis. Guitar players are okay, but it's you don't need to deal with the accordion players and the
And
you know you get the
drummers,
idea.
drummers and
Drummers,
DJs, right? Yeah.
drummers.
I hear you. Well, yeah, I actually think that for the synth world, Synthplex is going to give NAM a little bit of a run because if nothing else, it was my feeling was it was small but focused on this stuff, and it was really cool to be able to capture people's attention. You weren't struggling for the attention of people in a million meetings, so I thought it was pretty positive. Well, I can't believe it, but our time is already up. We burned through that really, really quickly. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule. I know you're a busy cat, and especially with all the things you have going right now, I know that probably wasn't super easy to get the time out, but I appreciate you doing it, man.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor. I appreciate speaking with you. Thanks for
Oh,
the opportunity.
yeah, well, my pleasure, certainly. Well, with that, I am going to let you go. Have a great one.
Thanks. You too.
All right, bye. All right, that was pretty incredible, right? As you could tell, I'm blown away by Aaron's work, both the quality and the amount of work that he gets done with such a small team. If you are interested in checking out more of his stuff, first of all, go to YouTube, take a peek at how the Blackbox, Synthbox, Bitbox, all those things work. They're pretty incredible. You can also check out their website, 1010music.com, to learn more about all of the products that they provide. But I'm just a big fan. I'll just say it outright. I want to thank you for continuing to support me in all the different ways you do, in listening, in writing emails, and meeting up whenever I happen to be nearby. Thanks so much for that. Remember, Expo 74 is coming up, so if you happen to be near North Adams, Massachusetts, stop on by and say hi. I'd love to see you. Otherwise, I will catch you next time around. Bye.